Welcome to DC Insiders, where we bring you sharp views about global issues with relevance to Taiwan from the political capital of the world here in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Wenchi Yu. Today, our guest is Rupert Hammond-Chambers, president of the U.S Taiwan Business Council. Welcome, Rupert.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
So tell us, what does U.S Taiwan Business Council do?
It's a non-profit trade association funded by American businesses, and it's designed as a platform for companies to have a voice in public policy. It was founded before the switch in recognition in '79, and after the switch in recognition, the council took on even more significance as the unofficial relationship provided obviously some challenges in government-to-government relations, but as a non-profit, we were able to provide a platform not just for our members to participate in public policy debate, but to invite government representatives from both Taiwan and the United States to participate in those debates and for business to have a voice to contribute.
So it actually started before the switch.
Indeed, it was founded in 1976 in the Baker and McKenzie offices in Chicago.
Wow, that's quite an interesting history that I wasn't aware of. So we have to talk about the tariffs. President Trump's tariff announcement originally assigned Taiwan with this very high 32% rate. Now it's temporarily suspended with just the baseline 10% rate. And then Taiwan was among the first to negotiate with USTR, and Taiwan was hoping for 0% tariff rate. What are the implications of U.S.-Taiwan business and trade relationships given these tariff announcements?
Yeah, well, the first thing that's going to be difficult for Taiwan is not to take it personally, because, of course, all America's trading relationships are undergoing a degree of stress and change as a consequence of President Trump and his colleagues' policy towards economic engagement, bilateral and multilateral. And frankly, that's hard for Taiwan because of the challenges that exist, given that many countries don't recognize Taiwan officially. But we do have a significant tariff challenge with Taiwan. Credit to President Lai Ching-te at the beginning of this year started a process within his own government to formulate a response to the coming tariffs. There was some real foresight given. He organized it under the leadership of the Vice Premier, and I believe what we're seeing now is a function or a consequence of that organization, given that the Taiwan government appears to have put together a fairly substantial package that deals with tariffs, non-tariffs, investments here in the United States, and also something that's sort of outside the tariff issue, but of course is hugely significant for the Trump administration and for Taiwan, and that's defense spending and the security relationship.
谈判关税可以从比照美加墨自贸协定，从台美双方零关税开始谈起。二，扩大对美采购以降低贸易逆差。行政院已经完成盘点，对农工、石油、天然气等产品的大量采购计划。国防部也已经提出军事采购清单，各项采购都会积极进行。
I mean, I think you mentioned, not to take it personally. I think it's hard not to take it personally, especially given how Taiwan just announced the TSMC $100 billion investment in the United States, and even the president or the government said it was a surprise for them that with this 32%. I think people in Taiwan are curious to know, what does this mean for Taiwan, right? What does President Trump really want Taiwan to do? So Taiwan can put together this beautiful package, including military arms sales, including purchase of energy, etc. There are lots of things Taiwan can do. Does that mean Taiwan has to double down on its investment in America? Or should Taiwan even consider diversification as a safe bet?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I'd make an observation. Even though this is, I was going to say feels, it is seismic in respect to the global economy, and America at the center of it, given that America is fully a quarter of global GDP. But I would also point out that this shift really started when President Trump was elected in 2017, and China policy shifted dramatically from the accommodationist policy pursued by the Bush and Obama administrations to a realistic policy. And the supply chains have started to shift as a consequence as well. So President Lai is quite right, and some of his colleagues are quite right, to point out that, for example, the burgeoning trade imbalance between the United States and Taiwan is in fact a function of American demands that the supply chain shift and balance out of China going back to 2017. And some of that investment has come into Taiwan, and as a consequence, we've seen a growth in Taiwan's trade imbalance. I would want to put it in that context. I think we are dealing with an ongoing process, which has been refined, obviously, by the Trump administration, given now what we've got, which is a laser focus on investment here in the United States. I believe President Trump, of course, many would argue that he's transactional. I think he's more than that, though. I think that oversimplifies the approach that he's taking. I think he's principled as well. And
he's principled.
Yes, I do, and I'm happy to talk about that and explain what I mean by that as well.
Yes, please do.
Yeah.
Yes.
But in this transactional space that we're seeing right now, and the shift in the supply chain, what is actually happening with the supply chain companies? Well, they are looking to allocate capital in different places, like the United States, like Dresden in Germany, or in Japan, if we're looking at TSMC, for sure. But what's critically staying in place is the trusted relationships that go with that supply chain. We had reporting out of the Wall Street Journal that Foxconn and Wistron will partner with NVIDIA in Houston and Dallas, respectively. I think that's enormously important, and again reflects that even though the investment is here in the United States, the familiarity of that relationship between NVIDIA and those supply chain partners is to me absolutely at the core of U.S. Taiwan economic relations.
Well, I think what you just talked about is very interesting. All these companies may have been working together in their own supply chain and ecosystem for a while, right? Perhaps on the island of Taiwan, but now it's slowly perhaps relocating some of that to the U.S. And one thing in particular you mentioned in the past, that you said the U.S. strategy here must be about risk mitigation, not about moving TSMC's entire ecosystem to the United States when referring to the semiconductors industry. And what do you mean by that, and what prompted you to say that?
Well, what prompted me to say it was, frankly, the shift in American policy towards supply chains, and particularly a focus on critical areas of supply chains. The semiconductor area, obviously, is very important. That was accentuated, for example, during COVID, during the chip dislocation and the auto industries, the impact on the auto industry. But it's certainly not the only one. We could look at pharmaceuticals, for example, with the United States buying a significant percentage of pharmaceuticals externally, and a lot, frankly, coming from China. These sorts of vulnerabilities are significant, and I do believe there's a rationale there with the Trump administration to say, look, we've got to identify some of these areas and have some of that manufacturing taken place, at least a critical percentage, so that if there is disruption, act of God or act of China, that production can continue here in the United States. If we stay with chips, though, even if the semiconductor commitment made by TSMC in the Phoenix area is fully realized, and I expect it to be, by the 2030s, you're still probably talking about maybe 20%. I know the number's been reported a little higher. I think it's the number that's publicly reported is actually a little high. The bulk of it is still going to be done in Taiwan.
From how you explain it, it makes a lot of sense. It's more about the U.S. onshoring to ensure its supply chain security. However, we've also heard some people saying and worried that there's an intent to hollow out the entire industry. And you had just explained that it's less likely because, it's only a certain percentage. But there's also a rumor that this current administration is pressuring TSMC to potentially take over Intel, whether it's through investment or other forms. How should Taiwan think about all these things, right? Like, semiconductors is clearly the crown jewel right now in Taiwan. What is the U.S. intention overall?
The U.S. intention is to create a critical mass here in the U.S. to provide, as I mentioned earlier, a level of production here that mitigates supply chain risk. Would that leave Taiwan of no value?
No.
not at all. And here are the reasons why. I mean, first and foremost, I can't imagine a president of Taiwan, Kuomintang, DPP, TPP or other, being able to survive politically if they allowed the goose that laid the golden egg to leave Taiwan. So there is a domestic political imperative, first and foremost, to ensure. Secondly, there's a practical challenge. The heart of TSMC is the 10,000 engineers that ensure that TSMC is the most important hardware company in the world. And that core group is not leaving Taiwan. It's going to stay there. And I appreciate in the CC Wei announcement here in the White House that there was talk about R&D standing up here in the States. But I would argue that that R&D will not be a part of the critical R&D that ensures that TSMC is going to remain the most important hardware company, and those generations of chip manufacturing, that leading edge, will continue to be done on Taiwan with a lag time, if you will, here in the States, in Phoenix, and of course in Japan to some degree as well.
We are going to build 3 more new fabs after we promised the 3 fabs already, and another 2 very advanced packaging fab, and most important, R&D center also in Arizona. I want to thank President Trump again for his support. In addition, I also want to thank my customers in the U.S., such as Apple, NVIDIA, AMD, Qualcomm, Broadcom. They all support TSMC's manufacturing in the U.S. Without their support, we probably cannot make it through.
Well, we've talked a lot about semiconductors because it's one of the hottest topics, but you've been with U.S. Taiwan Business Council for decades.
Yes.
And the business relationship actually probably wasn't as focused on technology in the past.
Yes.
And how has that relationship evolved over time?
Yeah. So, I mean, looking at it through the prism, if you will, of trade issues between the United States and Taiwan, if we go back 20 years, we can look at the protection of intellectual property. I mean, one of the big things was books, funnily enough, textbooks, which have some cost even now, as I'm sure recent students would testify to. And they were being illegally manufactured in Taiwan. And the United States and constituencies in the United States had some issue with it.
What kind of textbooks?
Oh, academic textbooks. So like textbooks for law school and for medical school and so on.
All right.
That actually have some significant value.
Right.
If you go for any of our viewers who might have gone through medical school or law school and had to buy those books. But it was an issue, you go back 20, 25 years ago. But also what you had at that juncture was an emergence of the violation of intellectual property and the necessity for more protection. And frankly, the critical change was when Taiwan technology companies, and we've touched on TSMC, I know you wanted to move away, but I'm bringing this back, when they started to file increasing numbers of patents and amass a critical constituency in Taiwan of its own intellectual property, then the whole view towards IP protection shifted.
So shifting from protecting American IPs to Taiwanese IPs.
Well,
right?
yes. I mean, to having less interest in protecting American IP because it was being violated in the region, and frankly, some of it on Taiwan, to wanting to have a regime that protected IP because the risks that Taiwan IP would be violated grew. We shifted then to agriculture. I think it's just important to recognize that in American trade policy, sometimes the loudest voices have the biggest impact on trade policy and agriculture, without question. Pork and beef.
Yes.
And of course,
very contentious.
Very
issues.
contentious.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. What about military and arms sale?
Arms sales have been consistent on and off. We've had certainly abundant periods. The first Bush term from 2001 to 2005. Then we had a difficult period, sort of with Chen Shui-bian at the tail end of through his second term. And then a very difficult time during President Obama's tenure. His government was not keen to sell weapons to Taiwan at all, and we ended up actually in his second term with almost a 5-year arms freeze, which almost certainly has contributed to the military imbalance in the Strait now. We had a catch-up period under President Trump during his first term, and then we certainly, the cadence of arms sales since 2020 has been good. but it has been extremely boundaried around the so-called asymmetric approach to deterring a kinetic attack on the island.
Explain what that means.
An asymmetric approach is supposed to look at things that you can buy that are relatively inexpensive, that you can buy a lot of, that complicate the enemy's planning. Munitions is a very good example. Anti-ship missiles, anti-air missiles, lots of missiles that complicate matters, or anything that might potentially negatively impact the last 20 to 25 miles of an invading force as it comes and to head on
It's
shore.
more defense-oriented
Correct.
energy, right? Yeah.
What it hasn't done, what we've been missing over the last 5 years, is it has not, we haven't had, certainly from a material security assistance standpoint, we have not had support for gray zone, blockade, quarantine. Those areas have been missing. Right at the time when, what have we been seeing with PLA operations, Coast Guard, Chinese
What would that
Coast
look
Guard?
like? What would be the things to
I think
deter?
bigger platforms. So Taiwan will have the largest F-16 fleet when the second tranche of F-16s are delivered. But you need aircraft to manage those that fleet of fighters. The E-2D is the right platform. It's expensive though. Taiwan has E-2Ks at the moment. They need to be replaced. But there's pushback because you get these sort of rather, if you'll excuse me for pointing out, intellectually lazy arguments that if it flies, it dies, so Taiwan can't have it. Or it's too expensive. But frankly, these aren't really sophisticated responses to the necessity for Taiwan to have a certain number of platforms to do things that aren't necessarily asymmetric. Hunt submarines, that would be another area. Taiwan needs helicopters for its naval aircraft to hunt submarines in the Taiwan Strait, the Bashi Strait, and around the island.
Well, are you concerned that given the budget cuts and debate in Taiwan that arms sale is going to be a challenge between the two countries?
Actually, I'm not. Funnily enough, I think from a security assistance standpoint, what we're seeing with our members and with the Taiwan government and with the Trump administration early on is significant support for Taiwan's security needs. Secretary Hegseth swing through Asia. He had a number of things to say and several commitments that were made directly related to Taiwan's security. We're not seeing any disruption in security assistance. That's the material side, training, hardware, a life cycle support for weapons on ground. Those companies are all our members and we're seeing consistent support. The rhetoric looks right and we would expect arms sales to continue at the right cadence. Where we have some questions, they are as yet unanswered, is how broad, how much permission there will be for an all of Taiwan support, not just a narrow support to deal with the kinetic attack.
What does that mean?
It just means not creating too steep boundaries around security assistance. In other words, saying, yes, we can sell you these things because they cost less money or they fit this so-called asymmetric approach. But no, you can't buy these things because perhaps they're too expensive or we've decided that, you don't need them. If I may, part of the problem of being selective about what you do and don't support is that as time progresses, it opens up vulnerabilities in Taiwan's ability to protect and deter. And if we are not supporting Taiwan's ability to deal with blockade or quarantine or gray zone, as time progresses, the PLA will capitalize on that.
Do you have an opinion about what should be the right percentage in terms of Taiwan's defense budget?
I don't. I mean, I do. I absolutely agree with those who say Taiwan should spend more, as should many others. This is where I might point to the principled part of President Trump and his colleagues. They've absolutely been right through the entirety of his presidencies. Friends and allies need to spend more money on defense. That they have been net consumers of American power. That has provided a platform for them to benefit commercially, while U.S. taxpayers provide for the security that provide a basis for that. And it's time to change. All countries, or most countries that are in America's orbit, Western countries and the Asia Pacific need to spend more on defense, as does Taiwan. Is there a magic number? No, I don't think so. I would only argue that it needs to keep going up year on year in real terms. But perhaps for those who argue that it should be 10% or something like that, I have concerns over that. I don't think that's a realistic or useful number to put out there.
Among your members, have you seen any newer type of members joining the council? Meaning, I think the last few years, we're seeing how technology is also revolutionizing the defense industrial base. And so are you seeing the defense tech type of companies joining, looking to sell to Taiwan?
Yes. So two important areas. It's a splendid question, by the way. Two important areas that have really the last few years accelerated. One is in technology, semiconductor companies. For many, many years, most technology companies would only spend money on R&D and production. And if you asked even a company with significant scale, well, do you spend money on government relations or promoting the relationship or trying to impact policy? They'd say no. Why would I do that? And the engineers that run these companies wouldn't want to. But that is absolutely shifting. And it's reflected in our membership for sure. Even companies that we would absolutely recognize on a day-to-day basis are now active members of the U.S. Taiwan Business Council, when even as near as 5 years ago, those companies weren't members. The other big area we've seen tremendous growth in the last 3 or 4 years, and particularly since the tragic war in the Ukraine, is defense companies with new technology that is battle tested in Ukraine and that is now being socialized in Taiwan to see if there's utility. Drones is obviously a big area of interest, but there are frankly many others.
What are some of the examples?
Unmanned systems.
Yes.
Subsea, ocean, air, unmanned systems.
Robots?
Absolutely. Robotics, for sure, matched up with AI. I mean, on that latter part, that isn't as battle tested as the drones are, but you've got kinetic drones, right, being used very effectively. Taiwan is buying off the shelf. AeroVironment, right, and Arundel are two very good examples. That's public knowledge. But Taiwan is also developing its own capabilities. And then those that are used for ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Taiwan is developing some excellent platforms. Taiwan can build basic platforms and then buy technology to embed. So in essence, Taiwan is one of the best countries, in my opinion, the best country for systems integration. A Foxconn, if you will. They're systems integrators, right? But you can take that prowess in systems integration and you can apply it in defense. So you can come up with a common platform and then sell subsystems that can be integrated into something that can be manufactured on island.
Fascinating. Other than defense, we've talked a lot about it. What are the other areas that you see, between U.S. and Taiwan trade and commercial relations potentially growing?
Energy, for sure. Taiwan's commitment to renewables is admirable.
Is it just renewables or traditional?
Well, traditional too,
as well.
But starting with renewables is impressive. You're seeing a lot of growth there in wind and solar. Obviously, wind and solar need to be underpinned by more traditional power, because if it's not windy or the sun doesn't shine, they don't work. But in the right energy mix, you do get important benefits. But yes, Taiwan's commitment to LNG particularly, and the infrastructure that's going on, is admirable. The downside of that, of course, is that LNG is extremely expensive to store and it runs out very quickly. So if you're looking at blockade scenarios, that creates challenges for Taiwan, particularly aggravated by, regrettably, the government's position on nuclear power and the closing of the nuclear power plants. Our position continues to be that those plants should stay open, and obviously the Lai government remains committed to closing them. That, at a strategic level, in our view, is a mistake. Even if the door remains open for future use of nuclear power, perhaps the small modular units that are being developed, but frankly not quite ready for prime time.
Well, might we see U.S. Taiwan bilateral trade agreement during Trump 2.0?
Well, we might be seeing it right now. That I think is the interesting thing about what President Trump has launched. I think it's important that your viewers understand that there are actually some fairly significant and growing legal wins to the policies that President Trump is rolling out over tariffs, given that Congress has a significant say in trade policy. And so you ask about a BTA, a bilateral tax agreement. Well, we touched on that, but a bilateral free trade agreement, we've long supported it. If President Trump can effectively remove tariff and non-tariff barriers, that's a big step forward.
Is that possible?
It is possible, but it is possible. Is it probable? Well, I think that there are legal issues surrounding whether or not he has the authority to do that here.
And he still needs Congress.
100%.
Yeah.
So I think there are some very big questions out there regarding just the extent to how far they can push and then the legality of that in respect to Congress.
Well, he still says that semiconductors might be tariffed.
Yes.
And what would be the impact on Taiwan?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have a good answer for you on that front as of yet. We know that the Commerce Department has launched an investigation into semiconductor. I think it's going to run a couple of months.
In a couple of months. Okay.
Well, the investigation, I understand, will last for a wee bit. Certainly, if we have an opportunity as an organization, as we always do, we will submit our position for consideration by Commerce and U.S. DR. But at the moment, it is unclear exactly. The only upside, as an incurable optimist, I will give this, that I would point out is I would come back again to TSMC's commitment in Arizona and Foxconn's very recent commitment to Texas, is that the companies will continue to do business with the companies they know and trust. The trust that's been built over decades.
Right.
And that will continue to bind the U.S. and Taiwan together.
Well, thank you so much, Rupert, for your decades of work in promoting U.S. Taiwan business relationship.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you for watching DC Insiders. Please follow us on social media to get the latest episode. See you next time.